Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Stephen stared out of the window with an absent look. It was about 8 o'clock. He had to get ready for the office. "I'll stop by Camille's and go to work," he said. Aloud, he took his briefcase and left his office. Stephen walked slowly towards his wife's room. "How are you today?" he asked Camille and stroked her head. "Christopher is coming tomorrow morning." "Thank you, Stephen." "Today, as always, a sleepless night and severe stomach pains," she replied quietly. Camille, despite the fact that she was only 50, looked like an old woman. Her strongly protruding cheekbones and eyes further disfigured her thin face. "Let's hope for the best." Her husband tried to cheer her up. "The doctor's coming tomorrow. Maybe he'll tell us something good." Camille tried to smile. Stephen kissed her and left the house. "John, let's go," he said, waiting by the driver's car. Stephen realized that there was no hope for Camille's recovery. He felt sorry for her, of course, but he did not want to lie to himself. There had never been love between them. They both knew that. It was a marriage of convenience, and then they knew what they were getting into. At first, he thought he'd made the right choice. But as the years passed, Stephen realized more and more that he had made a mistake. The only woman he loved was that funny girl he'd met at the movies years ago. "Young people, can we keep it down?" said the girl sitting in front. "I can't hear anything from behind you." "Do you want me to tell you the plot?" "This is the third time I've seen this movie," some guy said. "You don't have to tell me anything. You can just be quiet," replied the girl. "Don't you want to join us?" The guys laughed. "It'll be more fun with us." "You know, I'm not bored enough. I just want to watch a movie." The stranger was angry. The movie ended and the audience began to leave. "There she is with her polka dot dress," said one of her friends. "Let's hurry up for her or she'll be gone." "What's up?" "How about after the movie we go for a walk?" Did the guys run up to the girl? "Don't be afraid. My name is Robert. This is Stephen, and this is Kevin." The girl was a little embarrassed. She was about 18 or 19, but she had a baby face. Saucer-like eyes, plump lips, and a small nose. "I'm not afraid of you. I just don't want any introductions." Turned around and walked away. "Well, it's been 3 days and no results," Robert sighed. "I'm sick of this movie, every day the same thing. But to get to know girls, no. Don't worry about it, Robert. Maybe we'll get lucky tomorrow." Kevin patted him on the shoulder. Stephen had been friends with the boys for years, and even though he was the son of a very rich man, it didn't bother them in the least. It just so happened that the next day he saw this girl they had met at the movies. "Hello, I'll have a coffee and a croissant, please," he said to the pastry shop clerk. "What do you like?" The girl was arranging the pastries, only now she looked up. "Oh, it's you." She was embarrassed and added, "I don't like sweets very much." "Then maybe pizza." "Today at 7 on the square, taking a croissant and coffee," the guy suggested. "Okay, I'll think about it," replied the girl and looked at him with her big eyes. Then Stephen could not think that he would fall in love so that he could not live without her anymore. The gate opened and the car drove into the yard. Stephen went into the shop. "David, well, how are things going with the order for office furniture for the business center?" he asked a short man in a work uniform. "Stephen, the tables and chairs are almost finished. We have a few more kitchens and furniture for the lounge area, for the director's office. They want luxury furniture." Wiping sweat from his face, David answered, "Do we have time to meet the deadline or send more people to your shop?" Thinking about the words of the head foreman, asked Stephen. "I think we will. We need to transfer the order for the equipment for the director's office to another shop. Let the guys from the third workshop take care of the upholstered furniture." "Okay, I'll talk to James. Let's just do the office furniture then," said Stephen, and left. He had inherited the furniture factory from his father. It was one of the largest in the region. You couldn't say Stephen loved his job, but it was what he'd once chosen. "Emily, bring me the paperwork for the order that was paid for yesterday." He asked the receptionist, "and please make some tea." "Okay, I'll get it right away." Stephen went into his office. Lately, everything started to annoy him. He had no friends at work. With his people, he usually communicated dryly and coldly. He put down his briefcase and sat down at his desk. How would my life have turned out then ran through his mind if I hadn't turned out to be a coward? It was only a few years ago that he admitted to himself that he had chickened out. Did you really think I'd let you marry some beggar? Furious, his father shouted, "Are you out of your mind? Dad, she's not a beggar. She has a profession, and she works proudly," answered Stephen to his father. "You know, I've worked hard to build my furniture empire. And you think I'm going to let some beggar ruin it?" His father boiled with anger. "That will never happen." "All right, then I'll leave." Standing up from his chair, Stephen headed for the door. "If you leave this house now, there's no going back. I'll take everything away from you. You won't even be able to take your things out of here," his father said loudly. Stephen stopped. Of course, he loved her very much, but he was not ready to give up everything for her. Coward. He slammed his fist on the table. "Stephen, what kind of coward am I? I was a coward then, and I paid for it. Maybe we'd all have had a different fate. Camille and I would have lived different lives. Maybe she wouldn't have been sick. I've seen my mother and father in pain all my life. I knew how a marriage of convenience ended. I couldn't give up a comfortable life, my father's money." He rested his head on his hands. Suddenly the phone rang. "Dad, hi. I heard my son's voice. So how's Mom?" "Hello, Mason," tiredly answered the father. "Unfortunately, she is not getting better. Christopher's coming tomorrow. Maybe he'll have something to say. I'll come the other day. I spoke to a professor. He said there's no point in taking her abroad. The cancer has gone too far." I heard Mason's distraught voice. "We've got to hang on, son. We've done all we can," quietly replied the father. "Okay, we'll see you soon." Bye came from the phone and it went silent. The door opened and Emily entered the office. She brought some papers and tea. Stephen looked at his watch. In an hour, he had to be at James' workshop. He had to discuss the nursery order. He got up and went to the window. In front of his eyes, he could see the large factory workshops. A furniture empire. He said, "What has it given me? It became a golden cage for me. Who needs it now? I was tired of living not my own life but my father's for so many years." Outside the window, the workers flashed by. Forklifts went back and forth. The factory was bustling. It was the fall ordering season. Stephen watched it all. But inside him there was silence. You could say that he had fallen into complete indifference. His gaze drifted into the distance, and he saw her big eyes again. "I'm sorry, but I can't," Stephen said as they stood by the bridge. "What do you mean?" she asked in surprise. "We better break up. My father is against our relationship. Is he threatening to deprive me of everything? If I go against him?" "Stephen, but I'm not asking for anything. We'll live at our place first. My dad's all for it. And then we'll rent something." The girl tried to reassure him. "It's not that simple." The boy shouted angrily. "Please understand me." She didn't say anything. She just stayed silent, and tears flowed from her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, turned and ran away. Stephen flinched. He went back to the table and pulled something out of it. "Emily, if you need anything, I'm in shop 3, he said to the secretary and left. The day was warm today. Only the fallen leaves of the chestnuts were flying here and there. Stephen ran up to the director. Some worker in the 5th shop edging machine flew. "Where is Michael?" he quickly asked. "In the 2nd shop yesterday there were problems. He must be there." "Okay, I'll run and see," the guy answered and ran to the neighboring shop. It had been a hard day, and by the end of the day Stephen was very tired. It was about 8 o'clock when he got home. "Camille, how are you?" He went to see his wife. Mason called. "He'll be here the other day." "I'm so indifferent," she replied. "I ate a little today. Betty brought me some fish soup." "It's good to have your appetite back. If you need anything, I'm at my place." Stephen stood up. He wanted to support Camille, but he didn't know what to say. "Good night," he said, and after a little silence, he left the room. It was about midnight. Stephen was awake. Thoughts were snakes wriggling in his head. He was 55, but he felt 100 years old. It seemed to him that these were his last days. No more money, no more house, no more factory, no more family. "Stephen, are you really going to work in construction?" His father asked him one day, "Why not?" His son answered him, "I know the subject. It's not for nothing that I studied for so many years." His father grinned. Arrogance appeared on his face. "Do you want to spend your life in cement?" Sitting down in his chair, he told him, "You're an adult. Let's finally have a man-to-man talk." Stephen looked at him in surprise. He knew that his father was a rather bossy and selfish man. But until now, his father's perfidy had not hurt his son. "I'm offering you a cloudless future. I want you to have no problems in your life. After all, everything I have done and am doing is for your sake." The father looked piercingly into his son's eyes. "And what do you mean by that?" Stephen asked a little nervously. "I want you to be the heir to our furniture empire after graduation," joyfully answered his father. "Don't worry, I will help you." "Dad, but you know I have other plans. Robert and I were going to go to work." "Yes, you need to gain experience." My son said, "I'm not happy. That's what scares me." "Robert who? Don't you know anything about people?" "Stephen, it's time to join our circles." His father looked at him enigmatically. "Dad, what do you want? Tell it like it is. I can't understand you." Stephen got angry. "In short, you won't need anything. If you do what I tell you." "If you go against me, you'll be left with nothing and homeless," replied the father. There was a great power in his eyes. "I've already parted with you for your whim." The son wanted to contradict him. "I hope you understand what I told you," angrily interrupted his father. After this conversation, Stephen could not come to his senses for a long time. Then he realized that he didn't know his father at all. A month later, the owner of a large bank and his family came to their house for dinner. That's when Stephen met Camille. It was beginning to dawn outside and Stephen finally fell asleep. A few hours later, the alarm clock rang. He said without opening his eyes, "At 9 o'clock the doctor will come." Stephen lay down a little longer and put his feet on the floor. The weather had changed abruptly and it was raining outside the window. The drops were dripping down the glass and nothing could be seen. Stephen made himself some tea and buttered bread and sat down at the table. 8:45. The doorbell rang. "Christopher, come in." The landlord welcomed the guest. "The weather's not so good today. We're not wet." "Stephen, autumn has arrived," replied a tall, thin man with glasses. "Would you like tea or coffee?" Stephen asked thoughtfully. "Thank you. But I've just come from the table taking off my coat," replied the doctor. "Stephen," said the doctor, as they sat down on the sofa, "I have some bad news. We've run some tests. I'm afraid we can't expect any improvement. The readings are highly elevated. Cancer is fast-moving. And it may only be a matter of months." Stephen took a deep breath and lowered his head. "Is there nothing that can be done?" He looked up with a pleading look in his eyes. Christopher shook his head at the voluminous metastases. "The area is too large in her case. Chemotherapy is powerless." "I'm sorry." They were both silent. Then Stephen stood up. "Okay, Camille, waiting for you. Please come to her room," he said, letting the guest go forward. Half an hour later, the doctor left. Stephen went in to see his wife. "Camille, we will fight," he said, stroking her head. "Stephen, don't." "I understand." She smiled. "I feel like I don't have long to live. Just let me let it all go." "I'm sorry, but there was nothing I could do." Stephen cried. "What are you? It's not your fault." Taking his hand, his wife said, "Thank you for your son. Thank you for being in my life." She turned away, and tears streamed from her eyes. They both realized they just had to calm down and wait. "I'd like to say goodbye to my son." Turning to her husband, Camille asked. The next day, Mason arrived at the parents' home. "Dad, how is she?" he asked as soon as he entered the house. "Not doing well." "Upset," replied the father. "Hang in there, son. Come to Mommy. Is she expecting you?" Mason sat at his mother's for about an hour and walked out into the hallway with puffy eyes. He walked around the second floor. "This is where I spent my entire childhood." He walked with his hands touching the walls and door handles. "This used to be my room." He turned the knob and entered. His portraits still hung on the wall, and there were toys on the bed. He picked up one of them and fell on the bed, burying his face in an old bear cub. He sobbed for a long time. Mason," said his father as he walked into the kitchen. "I know you're not in need of anything, and you've had a family of your own for a long time. Dad, if this is about the factory, I don't need it. You know I never liked our family business. It's been quiet. I understand you. If only I could go back," he replied grudgingly. "I'd rather have nothing than listen to my father. Dad, you've done everything you could for me. You gave me the opportunity to get the profession I wanted, even though I became an architect. I never had much love for our furniture factory, and my grandfather was cold to me because of it. I'd say he never loved me. I was the only one who went along with him. Father was angry. He died happy, and I suffered all those years." "Well, sell it and start living your life," Mason said. "I don't even mind. If after Mom dies, you start a new family, I don't even think about it. I have a feeling I'll be leaving after her," Dad said sadly. "Dad, come on. You're only 55. Get rid of that factory and you'll feel better about your life," insisted the son. "You can even give all the money to some orphanage. I don't mind. I don't need the money." 2 months later, Camille was gone. It was a cold November day. There weren't many people at the farewell luncheon. Some of the coworkers were friends of Mason's. Wrapped in his coat, Stephen walked home from the restaurant. He let the driver go. He wanted to walk. "I'm all alone. I thought I had no one else. My father took everything from me, my friends, my love, my life. And we used to be such friends. Robert, Kevin, Stephen, come on. We can help you. If your father deprives you of everything, we'll find a place for you to live." Robert hugged his friend. "Sure, I don't mind either. You can work part-time with us. You can live with my grandmother for now, and then we'll see," supported Robert Kevin. "Thanks, guys. I don't know," Stephen hesitated. "It seems to me that my father's goal is not to deprive me of everything, but that it's a matter of principle for him." "Well, so be it with him and his factory. You're an adult. Start living your own life," Robert said. "Yes, but frankly, I'm afraid of him," Stephen confessed. To friends after Camille appeared in their house, Stephen's father insisted that he didn't need friends like Kevin and Robert anymore. "Stephen, what are you doing?" Robert was on the phone. "We were going to the construction site in Rostov together." "Robert, I'm sorry, but I can't." Trying to find the words, "Stephen, I'm sorry, but we probably won't be able to communicate anymore." Stephen disconnected his phone. It was like he died that day. The Stephen he had been was gone. Stephen walked slowly through the deserted streets. It was cold, and there were few people willing to walk in this weather. It was a meaningless life. It seemed I had everything. But in fact, I've lost everything. His mind was spinning. What to do next? How to live? He didn't know the answers to these questions at the time. The next day, he arrived at the factory early. "Maybe I'll get a little distraction," he said to himself. "I just have to see the new designs." But that day, one and another person came up to offer their condolences. "Thank you very much," Stephen replied. "Yes, we must hold on," he said. Different faces flashed before his eyes, and by lunchtime he was very tired. "John, please drive up. I'm going home early today," he called the driver. There was silence in the house. Stephen entered his wife's room. There was an empty bed. He stroked the pillow, covered his face with his hands, and sobbed. Evelyn stepped cautiously over the threshold of the old barn. It could hardly be called a dwelling. It had been used to house chickens years ago and hadn't been renovated since. She ran her hands along the wall, then turned around. She closed the door. "Evelyn, are you here?" She heard her mom's familiar voice. A woman in old rags was lying on what looked like a bed. "Mom, hi," the young woman said and approached cautiously. She drove her eyes around the room, but it was obvious that she was blind. She fumbled for her mother's head and kissed her. Evelyn was just over 30 and seemed to be good-looking, but the dirty clothes and long unwashed hair aged her. So she looked in her 50s. "It's cold today," she said, searching with her hands for the old kettle. "You must be hungry by now. Let's have some tea." They gave me a fresh loaf of bread and a cake. Evelyn fumbled for a jar of dried raspberry leaves she had found at an abandoned house in the summer. There was a branch clinging to her dress, and she wanted to pull it off, but suddenly she felt that there were berries on it. It was a raspberry. She then picked some berries in her pocket and did not tear the leaves into her bag. They would keep them warm in the cold more than once. Evelyn helped her mother up, and they began to drink tea. Suddenly the door opened and there he was. "What's this? Are you here to drink tea?" asked the man with an angry face. His eyes were running restlessly, and a noise came from his nostrils. "We don't take anything from you." Evelyn's mother retorted, "Have you forgotten who is the master here?" A man ran up in a frenzy. He kicked the old stool out from under Evelyn, and it fell to the floor. "What do you want?" "Liam, go away." The mother shouted and held out her hand for her daughter to get up. The man hissed and his eyes filled with madness. "From this day on, I'm raising the rate. Do you understand me? If you bring less, you'll live in the basement." He angrily picked up the jar of money that was on the table and walked out of the barn. Mom was sobbing Evelyn. "When will this end? I can't take it anymore." "Daughter, be patient. I will get up, and then we will definitely leave here." Stroked Evelyn's mother's face. It was late, and Evelyn was lying on the floor with some rags. "Mommy, tell me about Daddy," she asked and closed her eyes. "Your daddy's face lit up with joy," Jenna said. "He was the best guy I ever met." She looked through the cracks in the old window and smiled, remembering moments from the past. "What would you like to do with your life?" Jenna didn't stop. "I don't even know. I'll finish the institute and go to work," simply answered the guy. "Don't you like anything? After all, you have a dream." Playfully sparkled her eyes. "I would like to play the saxophone," hesitantly replied the boy. "I see myself standing in the street. There is commotion all around. I get some air in my lungs and start playing. Suddenly people stop and look at me in surprise. I close my eyes and fly away with the music." "Are you serious?" Jenna laughed. "But it's so easy to do." "Maybe it is, but it's very hard for me." Shamefully, he lowered his eyes and there was silence. Memories, memories. "Mom, did Dad love you?" Suddenly, Evelyn asked. "Yes," the woman replied. "I sometimes feel that he still loves me now. You know, my biggest dream is to see him," the daughter said and laughed. "Or rather, I would like to touch his head and hands." "Let's go to sleep, Evelyn. Maybe some people's dreams come true, but unfortunately not us." Evelyn fell asleep, but Jenna didn't want to sleep. She saw herself in the kitchen. Her father was going to come soon. Suddenly, the door opened and voices were heard. "Don't be shy, come in." Jenna stepped out into the hallway. A strange woman stood on the threshold. "Liam, come in," her father called someone. "No one bites here," he joked. A man entered the house. His hair was disheveled and a smirk was on his lips. Jenna didn't like them right away. "Jenna, this is Aunt Wendy, and this is her son Liam." "Hello," she answered quietly. "Daddy, can I talk to you for a minute?" Taking her father's hand, the girl asked. They entered Jenna's room. "Dad, who is that?" she asked in astonishment. "Jenna, I've been wanting to tell you for a long time, but I haven't dared. Aunt Wendy is my wife now. She and her son will live here." Embarrassed father answered. "I still understand her, but this one is how old?" The daughter shrieked angrily. "Until he works, he will live with us, and then he will rent his own place. So you're saying that this strange man, who is about 25 years old, will sit on your neck and mine?" "It's not going to happen," said Jenna. "Jenna, I want a normal life too. I want a family," justified the father. "All right, she can live. But he doesn't," she answered and left. The night passed quickly and the morning came. "Evelyn, wake up. You have to get up already," woke up her daughter mother. Evelyn woke up, she washed her face and helped her mother to go to the bathroom. "Mom, I'll clean all this up and feed you," said Evelyn, carefully taking out the bucket. "You hurry up. I heard Liam's voice outside. Hey, tell her to go to work, will you?" He shouted dismissively at Jenna. "She's not even 7 yet," Jenna replied. "Why would she just stand there? Are you going to teach me?" He raised his hand at her, but there was no blow. Jenna knew that, despite all the man's abominations, he had not touched them. "Be thankful, I'm not touching you." Went his cheekbones back and forth. They sure got lucky on that one. Liam had turned out to be such a misogynist that not that violence, not even touching a woman. He couldn't even think about it. "Who created you hell spawn?" he swore, as if I would gather you all up and burn you in some barn. The older Liam got, the more he hated women. Liam, but didn't a woman give birth to you? One day, Jenna snapped at him. He turned sharply, grabbed an old shoe from the floor, and threw it at her with force. From then on, they tried not to argue with him anymore. Evelyn threw on a stretchy sleeveless shirt she had found in the trash, picked up her cane, and left. The morning was frosty, and it was cold to her feet. Evelyn fumbled outside the store for a cardboard box and tossed it onto the pavement. It was already about 8 o'clock. People were rushing to work. She breathed as much air into her lungs as she could and began to sing. Her voice was unusually beautiful. Here and there people stopped in amazement. Some came back and threw coins into her jar. Some put paper money in her pockets. Evelyn sang in such a way that there were few indifferent people. Evelyn said hello. She heard it when she finished singing. "Hello, Charles," the girl replied. To a familiar janitor, "It's going to be cold today. I brought you some cardboard and styrofoam." The janitor took her hand and ran it over the paper. "Oh, Charles, thank you. I'm so grateful. Here you go." Charles put a fresh loaf in her hands. "You eat it yourself. I'll give my mother something for tonight." The janitor looked at the girl at the sight of her. Tears glistened in his eyes. For so many years she has been begging here. How much grief had she endured? Jenna lay on the old boards. Her back was hurting badly. She tried to roll over. Careful not to fall, she grabbed onto an old chair. Jenna didn't like to be alone, but when Evelyn left, she would start to sob. That way the pain would let her go for a little while. Jenna closed her eyes. "Dad, what is this?" screamed Jenna, going into her room. On her bed lay a satisfied Liam. "Jenna, yes, he'll be here for a few weeks, and then he'll be gone." Embarrassed, Dad replied, "You can even ask Wendy." "Yes, he'll be here for a while." The woman's eyes shone strangely. "Robert will be moving out soon, so don't worry." Jenna realized that something had to be done. She grabbed her bag and started packing. "Jenna, where are you going?" Dad was worried. "We told you he would move out soon and everything would be fine." "Dad, don't you understand? These people will stay here forever," she replied. "Jenna, but where are you going to go in your condition? You're going to have a baby in a few months." Finally, the father spoke sternly. "Daddy, you don't notice anything," she replied unhappily. "You have traded your daughter and your granddaughter for complete strangers. Jenna, live in the hall for now. I don't see any problem at all." The father replied nonchalantly. Jenna did not understand what was happening to her father. He was simply unrecognizable. Before he adored his daughter, he lived for her, but now it was as if he didn't see her. Jenna didn't know what to do, where to go. It was already hard for her to work. She had no money saved up and no place of her own. The day flew by unnoticed. Jenna heard a noise and realized that Evelyn had come in. The door opened and her daughter appeared. Mom said happily to Evelyn, "I am so lucky today." She cautiously approached her mother and handed her the package. "Evelyn dear, let's hide it for now," her mother said quietly when she saw the bread, cheese, and sausage in her bag. Jenna quickly shoved the bag under the boards as immediately the door opened. "So where's the money?" Liam asked angrily. He took the jar with relish and counted everything. "Are you lucky?" "A little more today." In an unmanly way, he smiled, spit on the floor, and walked away. It was one of those days when mother and daughter could finally have a proper meal. "Mom," Evelyn asked when they were already in bed, "why didn't you leave them?" "You know, Evelyn, that's a strange story. If someone told it to me, I'd say it doesn't work that way," her mother replied. She took a deep breath when I realized that neither Liam nor his mother would be leaving our house. I decided that as soon as you were born, I could get something off the allowance. But a month after I was discharged from the hospital, my father suddenly fell ill. I don't know if it was a coincidence or if it was Wendy and her son. But Dad stopped walking. I had to pay for doctors and medicine. Wendy wouldn't watch him or clean up after him. One day I couldn't take it anymore. "Get out of here so you and your son won't be here anymore," I shouted. She calmly got up from the table and left. A few minutes later, she brought a document. Be thankful she took pity on you, she said. Otherwise, you and your father will be sleeping on the street tonight. I read that it was a deed of gift to her and her son. I just couldn't believe this could happen. Daddy, did you write her a deed of gift? I asked in amazement. He lowered his eyes. That's right. I heard Wendy's voice. Now that everyone knows, I have nothing more to hide. You can stay in this house for now, but keep me and my son out of the way. And don't forget your payment. I won't take much, but I urge you to fulfill my requests and those of my son. Mom, so you are without a home? Evelyn asked. Not only without a house, sighed her mother, but not even without the summer house or her father's old car. He signed everything over to her. We had nothing else. I hoped my father would get better, but he never got up again. Jenna cried quietly. It was cold that night. Evelyn laid boards on the floor and spread sawdust, but she was still shivering. Finally, morning came. Evelyn was pale. Evelyn, my daughter, what is wrong with you? Asked Jenna. Are you not feeling well? Mom, I'm fine. Evelyn answered quietly. Let's have some tea and I'll go to work. Jenna was worried about her daughter but didn't know what to do to help her. Evelyn agreed a little, drank some hot tea, picked up her walking stick, and went out into the yard. The morning was as cold as the night before. Evelyn said to her Charles, Look what I have brought you. He helped her put on her warm jacket and slipped her feet into her boots. Charles, thank you, she said. I'm very cold. Yes, you're sick. Putting his hand on her forehead, he worried. Why don't you come sit in my back room? Charles, thank you. But I have to work, the girl replied. Evelyn tried to sing, but her throat was very sore. She couldn't sing that day. Jenna put her legs down with her hands. Lord, help me to start walking again, she whispered. She breathed in more air and tried to stand up on her feet. Her legs were cotton and she couldn't stand on them. Almost falling over, Jenna flopped down on the bed. She sobbed. Jenna remembered her father trying to get up again. Jenna, you just hold me and I'll get up, he said, grabbing a chair. But as soon as he shifted his body weight, he immediately fell to the floor. Jenna's father lay there for almost 7 years. He was slowly fading away. Jenna one day called out to her daughter, Forgive me, after I became disabled, I immediately realized that Wendy never loved me. I ruined both my life and yours. He buried his face in her hands and sobbed for a long time. A few months later, Dad was gone. Jenna thought, what? Now finally she could leave. She was packing her things when Wendy walked in. Where are you going? She asked in surprise. We're leaving, Jenna replied, taking her daughter in one hand and her bag in the other. Did someone say you could? Wendy said in amazement. What do you mean aloud? Answered Jenna, question for question. When my father was sick, I put up with you. Now I want to go. Don't even think about it, screamed Wendy. Who's gonna cook and clean here? Have you thought about that? Jenna walked silently out of the hall. You don't know me very well, said Wendy and pulled out her pocket. Evelyn's birth certificate and Jenna's passport. Even that won't stop me, said Jenna and walked out into the courtyard. Are you forcing me to go to extreme measures? Shouted Wendy from the porch. Jenna walked away. She didn't know where she was going to go. So she and Evelyn just walked down the road. Suddenly a car appeared from somewhere. It pulled up quickly and the door opened. Can I give you a ride? Asked the unpleasant man. No, answered Jenna. Suddenly several men jumped out and shoved her and Evelyn into the car. What are you doing? Screamed Jenna. Let us go now, she demanded. They were taken to some unknown place. Get the girl down, she heard. Evelyn was screaming loudly. Jenna tried to break free and run up to her, but she was hit hard and passed out. Coming to her senses, Jenna heard a rough voice. So listen up. If you try to run away from Wendy again, we will kill your daughter. Do you understand me? Where is Evelyn? Jenna sobbed. They dragged her out of some house and put her in a car. Where's my daughter? She screamed. If you behave yourself, you'll see her soon, answered the same unpleasant man with a scar on his face. Jenna agreed. She didn't know then that Evelyn had been kept in the basement for days by these men. Well, that's different now, Wendy said. When Jenna barely made it out of the yard, where's my daughter? She screamed angrily. Why are you yelling? You've been told it's up to you. She smiled. A few days later, Evelyn was brought in, but Evelyn was blind. After sitting in a dark basement, one girl lost her sight from fear. What have you done? Yelled Jenna at Wendy. Evelyn needs a doctor. I don't think you understand, replied Wendy calmly. I make the laws here. There will be no doctor if you keep this up. You'll never see her again. 3 days later, the police came to the house. I'm telling you it's not safe for her to keep the baby. The poor girl's already blind from fear. Wendy sobbed. All right, we'll take her away and make a criminal case against the mother. What do you mean? Take her away? Wendy was scared. Let her live wherever she wants. We can take custody of the girl. We've got a big house and we've got everything we need for the child. Well, if the girl has no one else, then let's do this, answered the man in uniform. Will you be the guardian? My son, Wendy said kindly. He's a good guy, he can work. He'll provide for the girl. I'm a little old after all. Is that your age? Laughed the representative of the guardianship authorities. Yes, I want everything. I want to be young, but unfortunately my youth has already passed, Wendy replied sadly. Here you are, please, all the necessary documents. Are you crazy? Liam's eyes sparkled frantically. Why did you put all this on me, Liam? Calmly replied the mother. I am only concerned about your future. You don't want to get married, do you? So I found you a maid. I hate it. He was furious, throwing plates from the table. No, son, you'll thank me for it, his mother replied affectionately. A week later, Jenna got up in the night. Evelyn was thirsty. She quietly walked to the kitchen. On her way back, she heard some sounds. She cautiously peeked through the open door. Jenna saw Liam pressing a pillow against Wendy's head. After a few minutes, her hands fell free on the bed. Jenna quickly ran down the hall, and her heart was fluttering hard. Mom. Evelyn's weak voice was heard. I'm here. Are you so early today? Asked her mother. Daughter, what's wrong? Evelyn hardly came in. She was shivering. She had a high fever. Her mother wheezed. Evelyn, I just couldn't today. What's going on in here? Liam's voice sounded ominous. Why are you here so early today? Evelyn is sick. The mother stood up for her daughter. I don't give a damn. I don't care if she crawls. Why didn't you bring the money today? Liam screamed madly. Liam grabbed a stick and went over to her. Don't touch her, screamed Jenna. Stop. But Liam didn't hear her. He had an animalistic grin on his face, and his eyes darted back and forth nervously. I know you killed your mother, Jenna suddenly shouted. Did you smother her with a pillow? Liam stopped abruptly. It was obvious that he was beginning to come to his senses. All right, I forgive you this time, he grinned. But if you listen to me one more time, the same thing will happen to you as to her. He dropped the stick and walked out of the barn. Jenna, sobbing, hugged her daughter. Evelyn, my daughter, forgive me, but there is nothing I can do. Kissing her daughter's hands, the mother wailed. Stephen wandered aimlessly around the city. Every day the work at the factory made him dislike it more and more. Mason is right to sell the factory. I can't take it anymore, he pondered as he strolled down Center Street. It swallowed up my father once. Now it's my turn. Despite the frost, the street was crowded. It was early December, and the New Year's Eve rush was slowly beginning. Stephen wanted quiet, so he decided to turn to the park. It was really deserted. Only the janitors flashed among the bushes, clearing the paths with brooms. Soon New Year's Eve would be upon us, Stephen thought. And this holiday I will celebrate alone. God, why did it have to be like this? If only then I could see how this choice would turn out in my life. He covered his face with his hands. The cold hands brought a little chill, and it was as if he had come to his senses. We have to move on. We have to make a change. Decisively, he got up from the bench where Stephen was sitting, left the park, and walked towards the local bazaar. He wanted to turn around before he reached it. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning, and people were coming and going in droves. Stephen was about to turn towards the bus station when suddenly someone started singing. He took a few more steps, but stopped. What a beautiful voice, he said aloud. This is something incredible. He walked back. Not far from the market gate stood some girl. She was dressed badly. Dirty hands, dirty face. Her hair was sticking out from under an old hat. Probably homeless. Stephen thought and walked over. He closed his eyes. The woman's voice echoed throughout his body, sending shivers down his spine. Her voice was so strong and melodious that it seemed to penetrate even through the walls. That was the power that ran through Stephen's mind. At first, he thought he would throw some large bills and leave. But he stood there for 2 hours. His feet were already freezing and his hands were starting to get numb from the cold. But he kept listening. Finally, the girl stopped singing. It was obvious that she was tired. "You have an incredibly beautiful and powerful voice," said Stephen, approaching the homeless singer. "No way." She turned her head at his voice, the most ordinary. They talked for a while. Stephen only now noticed that the girl was looking as if through him. "I'm sorry, I didn't see at once that you were confused." "Is he that I'm blind?" she asked childishly and smiled. "I'm sorry," Stephen apologized. "I shouldn't have said that." "Don't worry, I'm used to it," replied the girl. "I haven't seen for so many years that it doesn't hurt me at all. And yet you sing well. You have great hearing. My mom says I got my ear from my dad. He played the saxophone." Stephen felt hot. A great wave of past memories came over him. "I am very grateful for your singing," he said. "Thank you for your divine voice. Come, I sing here every day," the girl said with a smile. Stephen did not walk, but ran. He had a lump in his throat. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. "God, what's happening to me?" With pale lips, he said. At last, the tears came and he felt better. "John, please pick me up," he called to the driver. "I'll be waiting for you at the exit of the park." Stephen arrived home and walked slowly to the far room. He had never been here in the last 20 years. With trembling hands, he turned the knob. He took a deep breath and took a step. Nothing had changed here. A large, airy room, delicate, purple walls long forgotten. A table and a chair. He walked over and picked up a notebook. Stephen sobbed. He pressed the notebook to his chest so that it seemed impossible to tear it away. Then he slowly turned around. His legs wouldn't obey him, but he walked forward. At last he opened a cupboard. Stephen could not take the saxophone in his hands for a long time. He stroked its shining keys and whispered something. About half an hour passed and he made up his mind. At first it was tentative sounds, but then he closed his eyes and began to play. The saxophone music filled not only the room but the whole house. "Forgive me, friend," hugged Stephen, the instrument. "It's been so long since I've played, and you've been lying in wait for me for so many years." He put the saxophone down and sat back in his chair. The last time he had played was after the conversation with Robert. It was like a farewell march then. He was saying goodbye to his love and friends, to his old life. It was the march he was dying to. But today, thanks to that street singer, it was as if life was knocking on his door again. Stephen was very afraid of dashed hopes. But this time he felt that he was sure to have enough strength. He sat in silence for a long time and enjoyed the electric current running through his chest and hands in his heart. The time had come. He stood up abruptly. It was time to be himself again. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning when Stephen found the Wright house. It was Saturday, and he hoped to catch him at home. "It must be here," he said. From what the woman had said, this was his house. The furniture was being unloaded from the car, so the door to the driveway was open. Stephen stepped in cautiously. "I wish you were home," he muttered and pushed the elevator button. His hands twitched with excitement. He took a few deep breaths to recover a little. What if he didn't want to see me? Stephen stood hesitating at the door with the number 85. "Whatever happens," he said and pressed the bell. Who heard it? It was a long-forgotten voice. "May I, Robert?" he said hesitantly, rubbing his hat in his hands. The door clicked open. "What do you want?" a middle-aged man asked. "Robert, don't you recognize me?" Stephen looked him in the eye. "It's me, Stephen." The man was silent. He stared at the stranger as if he didn't know what to say. "Stephen," at last he exclaimed. "Stephen, come in, friend. How glad I am." A heavy stone fell from Stephen's heart, and he breathed quietly. "Vanessa, an old friend, is here to see me." We'll sit in the kitchen." A short woman entered the room. "Hello, I'm Vanessa Robert," she said with a smile. "I'll put the tea on for you now." "I'm sorry, Robert didn't warn me that we would have guests today. I'll quickly go to the store." Don't worry, I'm embarrassed, Stephen. I'd just like to see a friend." Robert was happy, but you could see the tears glistening in his eyes. "Stephen, I'm so glad. God, how many years have I dreamed of this meeting? You can't even imagine." "Robert, I'm sorry." Stephen could not bear it. The tears flowed, and he couldn't hold them back any longer. "I was very hurt at first. I didn't understand how you could trade true friendship for money. But when I grew up, I began to realize that everything in life is not so simple." Robert took his friend's hand. "Robert, thank you. You have no idea how afraid I was that you would reject me," said Stephen. "Stephen, I mean, you've always been a good guy. You just had to go through all this." His friend patted him on the shoulder. "Do you know how Kevin is?" Stephen asked, sipping from his mug of tea. "Kevin, he's fine. He comes here sometimes. They live in the country now. He's had a good life too, what?" Robert's been quiet. "But what?" Stephen asked him impatiently. "His little girl is sick. She has cerebral palsy. Unfortunately, they need money for treatment, and Kevin doesn't have any. They're trying to do something on their own, but Molly can hardly stand up." Robert scratched his head. "Robert, I'll help Kevin. Do you think he can forgive me?" "Stephen, we forgave you a long time ago. For years now, whenever we see each other or talk on the phone, we always think of you. You know, Kevin once said to Robert, who knows? Maybe one day Stephen will find us." And so it did. "How happy am I? We can meet Kevin begrudgingly," Stephen said. "We'll arrange it. Don't worry," said Robert and picked up his phone. "Kevin, hi. Listen, friend, we need to meet urgently." "Yeah, this isn't a phone call." "Don't worry, you're on the money. The tickets and the night's stay are on me. Come on, come straight to our cafe tomorrow. I'll be waiting for you there. Yes, it's very urgent, so don't be late." Robert hung up. "That's the deal. You know the cafe on Marxist Street?" Stephen nodded affirmatively. "Kevin will arrive at about 9:30. By the time he gets there at 9, he should be there. We'll be waiting for him on the spot." "Robert, thank you," Stephen said, and squeezed his hand tightly. For the first time in many years, Stephen looked forward to tomorrow. "Miracles happen in my life," he smiled as he lay in bed. "Once I decided I didn't want to live like this anymore, everything started to change. How happy am I? Robert has forgiven me and I have a friend again." Stephen tried to sleep, but the feelings overwhelmed him. He couldn't even close his eyes. Robert's shining face flashed before him. The alarm clock rang. Stephen got up. "I guess I've managed to sleep after all," he said to himself and threw on a robe and went to the bathroom. He cleaned himself up, put on jeans and a warm sweater. It was about 8 o'clock and he went out into the yard. "John, please take me to Old Cherumushki somewhere closer to the shopping center. I can walk from there myself," he asked John. Stephen was very worried. Kevin had always been a serious man. What if he didn't want to see me? What if he didn't want to see me? Maybe not now, but at least in time he could. "Forgive me, I'll help his daughter. Not that I want to buy our friendship, but I feel like doing it." He got out of the car and breathed in the cold morning air. Stephen rarely walked, but now the energy overwhelmed him. He wanted to move. Stephen had purposely arrived early. He was looking forward to seeing his friend. "I used to wait for them in the evening by the fountain." Kevin was always on time, but Robert was always late. He smiled at his memory. Robert often got into some funny stories. Kevin and I would help him out. Suddenly, a man who looked like Robert appeared up ahead. Stephen waved at him. "I had no doubt you'd be here first." Robert laughed. "Well, I'm late as usual." They went into the cafe and sat down at a table. "I'm so worried I haven't even slept at night," Stephen said nervously. "Stephen, oh really? You'll see, Kevin will be very happy." Robert supported his friend. After about 20 minutes, a gray-haired man appeared in the doorway. He stood looking for someone with his eyes. He hesitantly approached Robert and remained silent for a few minutes. "Was it really you, Stephen?" Kevin asked in astonishment. Kevin, it's me. Stephen stood up and walked towards him. They looked at each other as if they couldn't believe their eyes. Finally, Kevin came over and hugged his friend. How happy am I to see you again? He whispered through his tears. Kevin, you too. I couldn't help it. Stephen and sobbed. Forgive me, friend. As the friends came to their senses, they talked cheerfully. Guys, I've missed so much. I want to make up for it, said Stephen. When did they open the bottle of wine? Stephen, have you seen it yet? Kevin asked, taking a few sips. Or didn't you look for her? Kevin, I really want to, but frankly, I'm afraid. Maybe she has a good home and family. What am I going to tell her? Forgive me for leaving you back then. And if you don't? Robert suddenly said, if her life isn't going well, maybe she's in some kind of need. Maybe she's waited her whole life for you. Maybe it's a cliché. Heavy, sighed Stephen. Well, that's pretty good. Licked his fingers, counting the money. Liam, I see you even got a big bill today. Jenna and her daughter were silent. Here's what I'm thinking. It's getting close to the holiday. There's a lot of people walking around, so you might as well up the ante. He laughed wryly. Liam, don't get cocky, Jenna replied. Evelyn makes good money as it is. Shut up. His eyes sparkled. I didn't give you the word. I told her to bring in more money before New Year's Eve. Then so be it. Liam, it's cold outside. Then let Evelyn stand less time trying to talk to Jenna humanely. Didn't you hear what I said? Do you mind? She'll be standing till night. He swore profanities and left. Mom, I'm not going to make that much, Evelyn sobbed, hugging his mother. I just got lucky today. If I could see, I wouldn't take such big money. The more I bring, the more he wants. Jenna, my daughter, her mother stroked her head. It's got to end sometime. God, if it has to end, let it end now. Mom, I'll have to take your picture again, or people won't throw me so much money. Evelyn said worriedly, if I don't bring him enough money, he'll throw us in the basement in the coldest weather. Okay, Evelyn, it's under the bed in a bag. We'll get it tomorrow morning, said Jenna. Now let's go to sleep. Jenna felt sorry for her daughter, but it had been 5 years since she had been able to get up. She used to take Evelyn with her when Jenna worked, so her heart was at ease, and she knew Liam would do nothing wrong. They traveled together to the bakery where Jenna produced the bread. She worked the night shift, and Evelyn had the opportunity to sleep here. After Wendy died, Liam became the sole owner of the house. He immediately threw Jenna and Evelyn out into the barn where they had been living all along. Because of his hatred of women, he no longer allowed them near him. After the night shift, Jenna worked as a janitor. Liam set her a rate that she had to pay every month. Naturally, he didn't work himself. Jenna remembered well that day it was winter and there was snow everywhere. She had a paycheck that day, and she and Evelyn had decided to go on a run. Jenna was going to go to the police and tell them everything. She realized that she and Evelyn didn't have any identification, but she hoped that they could be accepted. They decided to spend the night in the workroom. In the morning, they would make an application to Liam. They didn't want to go home again. Mom suddenly said to Evelyn, I forgot Dad's ring at home. It was the only thing Jenna had left from Evelyn's father. He had given it to her as a gift, asking her to marry him. Jenna had miraculously managed to hide the ring so that Liam and Wendy wouldn't find it. For Evelyn, it was the most precious thing in her life because it reminded her of her father. Mom, I'm begging you, let's take the ring, sobbed Evelyn. Maybe Daddy's gone. And then it's the only thing that ties us together. Evelyn, we can't go back. It's very dangerous, the mother replied. I don't even know what Liam could do to us. Mom, please, I can't live without him. When I hold it in my hands, I feel that Daddy is near. Evelyn wouldn't stop. All right, her mother finally agreed. But we have to go in the dark or he'll see us. They waited until it was dark and approached the house quietly. You stay here. I'll get the ring myself, Jenna said. She opened the door carefully. Jenna walked very quietly. She was about to walk up when suddenly she felt a strong blow in her back. What? Are you mad? Shouted Liam. You thought you were the smartest. Laughing hysterically, he ran around Jenna. She was silent. Answer me. He yelled he had nothing to say to you. Have you forgotten who's the boss? There was no answer. Mom. I heard Evelyn's voice. Mom, where are you? Is this where you ran up to Evelyn? Liam, quickly go to your barn. We'll talk tomorrow. He left and Evelyn heard her mother's voice. She was moaning. Evelyn tried to help her up, but Jenna could not stand on her feet. Then Evelyn dragged her to the barn. She struggled to pull her mother onto the bed. From that day on, Jenna never got up again. It was a December morning, thanks to the jacket and boots that Evelyn had given Charles. She was warm. Mom, let's have some hot tea, she said and pulled out 2 glasses. She lit a small fire in the barn. It warmed up a little, the kettle boiled, and they had tea. Mom, where's the picture of the hands on the boards? Evelyn asked. There's a bag on the left side. Found it. Evelyn's hand came out from under the bed. In it was a tattered bag. She fumbled for the photograph and pulled it out. She felt for the photograph. This would be better. She smoothed it out in her hands. Mommy, it's so good. Look at it. It's all right, daughter. After seeing my friends, Stephen was flying. His strength returned to him, and he wanted to live again. I wish I could meet her. Once he asked himself, coming back from work, if she could forgive me. Maybe she doesn't need me anymore. She has a husband and a family. Old memories came flooding back, and he picked up the saxophone. The sounds pierced through his entire body. He wasn't playing. He was telling a story, and it was a love story. The saxophone was able to convey his feelings and emotions, and what he was going through. The melody would sink in, telling of his suffering, then lift him up on the wings of love, patting the saxophone like an old friend. Stephen went to bed. After all, it was all thanks to that homeless girl. He thought, I started playing again. She gave me courage and I found my old friends. I want to see her again. The face of the street singer flashed in his mind and he fell asleep. Stephen was walking through some dark streets. Where was he? He could not understand. Everything around him was unfamiliar. Stephen suddenly heard someone's voice. Stephen, I'm here. He turned around and walked to where the voice was calling him from. He walked to the end of the street and stopped. Stephen, help me. It was coming from some window. He bent down and saw a grating at the ground. A hand was reaching for him. Stephen shuddered and woke up. God, what a terrible dream. It was about 6 o'clock. But he didn't want to sleep any longer. Stephen dressed and went downstairs. It was still a long way from dawn, so he decided to sort through the papers in his office. It's been a long time since I've cleaned this place up. He opened his closet. Stephen went through the documents from the archives. There was no problem with them. They were organized by year. Suddenly, he noticed a small box. What is it? Surprised, he opened it. Ah, yes, these documents I took from my father's house after his death. He dumped the contents on the table and began to read. Property deeds, death certificates for my mother and father. What's this? Stephen took the envelope. It was written on it for Stephen to hand deliver. I don't remember this letter. Stephen thought about it and opened it. Stephen, I don't need anything from you, but I want you to know that you have a daughter and Jenna's signature. The man turned pale. Father, what have you done? Sobbed, he kissed a letter. Why have you punished me so cruelly? For about an hour, he sat motionless. I must go for a walk or I'll go mad. Stephen jumped on a streetcar that would take him to the park. It was already dawning. He looked out the window, but his thoughts were far away. How could anyone be so inhuman? The same question kept running through his mind. The streetcar had reached its terminus. Man, did you oversleep? Said the female driver. This is the final stop. Will you get off? Stephen did not answer her anything. He went to another streetcar and asked which one was going to leave. A few minutes later, he was on his way in the opposite direction. This time he got off at the stop near the park. His legs were carrying him somewhere, but he wasn't paying attention to where. The pain was so intense that he didn't know where to run away from it. The fresh air loosened his taut nerves a little. Stephen began to realize that he was walking towards the bazaar. The place was bustling with the New Year's Eve, and passers-by were running about. Not 100 meters away, he heard a familiar female voice. I'm going to listen for a while, Stephen said to himself. Maybe I'll come to my senses. People gathered around the blind girl. Some threw coins into her jar, some left bags of groceries. He stepped aside and stood silently. That day the woman sang and sang. It seemed that there would be no end to it. But after a while she stopped singing. "Hello," Stephen came up to her. "How are you?" "Oh, it's you," the girl replied cheerfully. "I'm very happy to hear from you again. You really have phenomenal hearing." He marveled. "Do you remember me?" "If one thing doesn't work, another thing replaces it," she replied. "You know, I'm very grateful to you." Looked at her. "Stephen, you changed my life." "Oh, really?" The singer was embarrassed. "I only sing on the street, and it's not a stage." The girl waved her hands. Stephen turned pale. Only now he noticed a picture on the ground. "Who is it?" He said in a trembling voice. "You mean the picture on it? My mom. Unfortunately, she's sick. She can't walk." Stephen thought he was going to lose his mind. "What's your mom's name?" He could barely pronounce it. "Her name is Jenna." The girl answered calmly. "I'm Evelyn. I'm sorry, I have to go now." Said the man. "You and I will meet later." Stephen unbuttoned his jacket. He couldn't breathe. With pale lips, he swallowed the cold air. He gathered some snow with his hands and spread it on his face. Finally, he felt a little better. Robert, barely audible, he said into the phone receiver, "I found her. Please come, we have to meet. Or am I going to lose my mind?" Stephen was sitting on a park bench when Robert came running up to him. "Stephen, friend, what's wrong?" He said excitedly. "She didn't want to see you, Robert. Jenna had a baby girl, and it's my daughter. She wrote me a letter in desperation, but her father wouldn't let me read it. I found it today in old papers through tears," he replied. "That's the deal." Sitting on the bench next to Stephen Robert. "But that's not all. Jenna is ill, and her daughter is now singing near the bazaar." Stephen burst into tears, hiding his face in his hands. "Stephen, let's get on with it. This news can make me crazy too." About an hour later, when Stephen had calmed down, they walked towards the bazaar. "What a voice!" Robert exclaimed in surprise. When they approached Evelyn, they stood silently listening. Tears were running down their cheeks. Evelyn stopped. "Hello again, Evelyn," pronounced Stephen closer, walking over to her. Hearing his voice, the girl smiled. "Evelyn, how is your mother?" Robert asked her. Looking at the commemorative photograph, she shuddered. The unfamiliar voice made her a little confused. "Evelyn, don't be afraid, it's my friend." Once again, she heard Stephen's voice. Mom didn't really lower her head. "Jeff, she's been lying down for almost 5 years now." "And where do you live?" Robert's voice was heard. "I'm sorry," Evelyn replied sharply. "I have work to do." "Evelyn." Stephen took her hand. "I'm your friend. I want to help you." It was obvious that the girl was very worried. She hesitated and did not know what to say to Evelyn. "I knew your mom." Finally, Stephen said, "Please, we can talk to you. I also knew your father." "Well," answered Evelyn. "What should I tell you?" "Tell me everything from the beginning." "I couldn't help myself, Robert. Let's get away from your place of work for a moment. There's a little cafe nearby. We could have a cup of tea there." Evelyn agreed, and Robert wiped the sweat from his face. They went into the cafe and sat down at a table. Stephen placed the order. Evelyn asked for a balayage and a sweet bun. It was obvious that she was very nervous. That's why her story was incoherent at first. But after a few minutes, she calmed down and was able to tell everything. Stephen and Robert sat there in complete shock. Neither of them could say a word to Evelyn. Stephen was the first to come to his senses. "What you've told me is terrible, and I'm sorry. I can't take it anymore." Evelyn sobbed. "Please help us." Stephen touched her arm, gently stroked Evelyn's head. "I can't leave my mom. How will we escape then?" She cried. "Evelyn, we'll figure it out together. Just don't say anything to your mom yet. The main thing is to get you out of there, and then we'll deal with the police." They sat in the cafe for about an hour. They had to come up with a plan. "The main thing is that this monster should not guess anything, Evelyn. Try not to reveal anything about yourself," Robert said. And they left the cafe. Evelyn ran home that day. She knew that Liam would have nothing to say today, and that tomorrow she would be a mother's mother, Evelyn said as soon as she walked in. "I love you so much." "Evelyn, hi." Her mother replied, surprised. "Are you so happy today?" "Yes, I was able to earn enough money, and I managed to get groceries. So we will have a nice dinner tonight." Liam's voice was heard, and she quickly hid the bag. "Well?" Liam's nasty voice screeched. "Where's my money?" He forcefully closed the door, rubbing his hands together, walked over to Evelyn, getting ready to move to the basement. Liam laughed madly. "Or did you get lucky today?" He walked over to the table and picked up a jar with a bestial smile. He started counting. "Well, you're lucky again." He stroked his big belly. "All right, you can sleep well tonight." Evelyn tiredly sat up after a little rest. The girl went under the bed. She took out some food, and after eating dinner, they went to bed. "Mom, what if we ever get out of here?" "What would you do?" "Would you?" asked Evelyn, the mother. "Oh, Evelyn, I think I'm going to stay here for the rest of my life," she sighed and cried. The morning at their house began early. Just as dawn broke, an unfamiliar car pulled up to the house. "Who is it?" Jenna asked in surprise. When someone knocked on the gate, Liam didn't leave the house for a long time. Finally, he appeared on the porch and shouted, "Who's there?" "What do you want?" "Hello, I'm from the Bureau of Technical Inventory. We need to check your house documents. You have been found serious violations. If we don't resolve these issues by New Year's Eve, you'll be in trouble. You may even lose your house." Liam hesitated a bit, but when he saw the documents in the man's hands, he agreed. He led the employee into the house. God, the dirt. Thought to himself, "Stephen, it's just some garbage." Kenny looked around in shock. "Evelyn." There was a man going into the house. Worried Jenna. "I'm scared, Mom, it's okay," Evelyn replied and opened the door to the barn. This way, she waved her hand to someone. Two people ran into the barn. One of them approached Jenna. "Who are you?" She was scared. "Please don't hurt us." "Jenna, it's okay, calm down," said Robert and took her in Kevin's arms. "Evelyn, get it." They left the barn and closed the door behind them. Quickly through the gate, they ran to the car. "Robert, lay her down carefully," Kevin said. "Cover her with the blanket." "Evelyn, get on the floor and get down." "We'll do everything. Don't worry," assured Liam Stephen. "It will be ready in a few days." Liam closed the gate and left. He was a bit confused and had forgotten all about the barn. The door to the house slammed shut behind him, and he began to read the documents the bureau clerk had left for him. The car was speeding down the road. "Kevin, free Jenna's face," shouted Robert. "It's okay, girls, we'll be home soon." Stephen whispered to Jenna from the last strength. It was you, and her eyes became foggy, and she lost consciousness. Jenna opened her eyes. She was lying on some big bed, her back hurting. "Evelyn's daughter," she said quietly. "What's going on?" She came to her senses, the woman said, and wiped Jenna's forehead. "Hello, Jenna." She heard a familiar voice. "How are you?" "Stephen, I thought I was dreaming," she said. And it turned out to be true. She cried. Jenna had waited so long for this day, but now she didn't know what to say. "Jenna, I'm sorry." "Then I chickened out and lost my life," he said, taking her hand. "I loved no one but you." "But why didn't you answer when I told you had a daughter?" she asked. "Jenna, I read that letter by accident, and it was yesterday. My father hid it, so I didn't know anything about you or Evelyn," he replied. "Everything will be all right now. I'll be back soon, and we'll talk about everything." Stephen took his briefcase and went downstairs. "John, we're going to Christopher's. We need to pick him up," he said to the driver. An hour later, they were standing in the hallway. "Christopher, they both look bad. I'd say they've been held captive for years. Please show some understanding. Stephen, I'm a doctor. It's my job to save people. If they were all right, then why am I here?" Smiling, Christopher replied. The doctor examined Evelyn and Jenna for a long time. Finally, he was satisfied and said, "Sweet women, a nurse will come tonight. You will need to take tests, and tomorrow we will put you in the hospital. We will need to monitor you. It's been a very busy day." In the afternoon, two policemen arrived and started asking Evelyn and Jenna questions. A statement was taken from their statements. The police officers said they would have to wait a few days. Jenna, all that day, could not talk to her daughter. She asked Stephen so they could share a room to sleep in. Mom shouted joyfully to Evelyn, running her hands over her face. "I'm so happy. If you only knew." "Evelyn, so you knew who these people were?" asked Jenna as she lay down on the bed. "Yes, we came up with this plan together." She stroked her mother's hand. "Do you know who they are?" Cautiously, Jenna turned to her. "They're Uncle Stephen, Uncle Robert, and Uncle Kevin." "Did you all used to be friends together?" Evelyn answered cheerfully. "Evelyn, we really used to be friends. So he didn't tell you." Surprised Jenna. "Mom, what did you ask her daughter? Who is he? And what was he supposed to tell me, Evelyn?" "Stephen is your father," finally said the mother. Evelyn was silent. It was as if she had stopped breathing. For as long as she could remember, her father had been her fondest wish. "Mom, this is the happiest day of my life," she said and cried. A day later, Jenna was admitted to the hospital. She realized that the only thing she wanted then was to start getting up. Even if she had to walk with crutches, it didn't scare her. "Stephen, look at this." The doctor was pointing to the x-rays. "You can see one vertebrae is dislocated. But we were lucky. The nerves are still intact. We just need to put them back in place. There's a very good chance that after the surgery, Jenna will walk again." The doctor put the scan on the table and went to the window. But with Evelyn, it's more complicated. In a neglected form, and it's been so many years. We're not even talking about getting 100% vision back. We could at least get to -11. There's not much hope, but there is hope. If the surgery goes well, even with such poor vision, Evelyn will be able to live a normal life. She will just wear glasses all the time, the doctor said, looking out the window. "I will pay any money," Stephen asked, "just please help." "Unfortunately, I'm not a wizard. I can't promise anything." Deeply sighed the doctor. A few days later, Jenna underwent surgery. Everything went well. She was not allowed to stand up yet. First, she had to undergo rehabilitation to restore the function of her lower back and leg muscles. "Jenna, how are you feeling?" Taking her hand, Stephen asked. "I was so worried." "It's okay, Stephen." She stroked his face. "Thank you for everything." "Jenna, I love you." He kissed her hands. "I'm not letting you go anywhere else." "Mom." Evelyn's voice rang out. "This is for you." She held out her bouquet carefully. "It's from my brother and me, so you've already met Mason." Mother laughed. "When you were a child, you wished you had a brother." Mason appeared in the doorway. "Jenna, congratulations," he said and hugged the woman. "Evelyn is leaving with Molly on Monday," Stephen said. "Maybe I'll still go with her," Jenna worried. "I'll be so worried." "Jenna, don't worry. They won't be alone. Kevin and his wife and Christopher are going with them." Stephen reassured her. "You need to get back on your feet." They talked some more, and Evelyn and Mason left. "Jenna, why didn't you leave with Evelyn when she came of age?" Stephen asked unexpectedly. "You know, when I think back, I can't believe all this happened to me. Until I was 18, I had no right to talk to her at all. Wendy's lies got me disenfranchised. As you know, Liam had all of our papers. But despite that, the day she was born, we were going to run away. We came home early from work that day. Liam knocked on our door. He said that today was the day he would finally be free of us. But Evelyn had some papers to sign. I don't know how he did it, but when they came back, he showed his and Evelyn's passport. It was stamped, he married Evelyn. What documents did she sign? She couldn't see. What were you thinking? I'm going to let you leave. His animal laughter rang out. You forget, I'm your master. I just couldn't leave my daughter there, and he knew it. So I kept working and feeding him. Don't worry, he won't bother you anymore, Stephen said and looked into her big eyes. They put him away, Jenna asked, squeezing his hand.